We'll go in and we need to remember our mind can't process everything that happens. So if you take any situation that occurs, your mind is constantly deleting, distorting, and changing what's happening. So what we remember having happened is usually not the truth. Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome, my friends. You know what time it is. It's time for Life of a CISO with yours truly, Dr. E is in the house. And those of you who've been following along, we're actually doing a three-part series. Sometimes when I start these topics, this one is fact versus fiction. I think it's going to be one episode, and based on how it goes, if you haven't figured it out, I don't have a script. I do spend time, just so you know, scripting it out, but sometimes I go in different directions. I add some different content. This is really coming from the heart, right? Not the head necessarily, so it's not pre-scripted or pre-recorded. So what I think is one episode can be three, and sometimes you might have noticed what I think is one episode is shorter than I thought, and I have to add in some information. So we're in this topic. If you haven't listened to the other two, you should. If not, this really stands independent. The idea is fact versus fiction. And the whole concept is there's a lot of things in our life, even if we go outside of being a Chief Information Security Officer, that we make fact that's really fiction. Or fiction that's really fact is probably the better way of going about it, where we'll go in and we need to remember our mind can't process everything that happens. So if you take any situation that occurs, your mind is constantly deleting, distorting, and changing what's happening. So what we remember having happened is usually not the truth, is usually not factual in nature. But here's the problem. We go in and our mind selectively takes information, and in order to protect us, in order to keep us safe, or for various reasons based on our rules, our programming, our beliefs, we will record certain pieces of information and over time play them in a way that all of a sudden we believe them to be true. And now all of a sudden we have these list of truths that we believe are factual that we use to guide our lives, and in reality they're pure fiction. They're just not true at all. And we're focusing in on things as a CISO that you need to be aware of. But before we get to that, Happy New Year. And I think this will actually launch our second one of the year, but I recorded our other one last year. We record usually about a week ahead of time, so we have time to edit and modify. But we're probably second week into January when this episode drops. And the question I have for you, what are things that are currently standing in your way? What are things that are stopping you from living your full potential that you believe are true, that you believe are factual, and they're not? They're just not true. And if you were able to change those beliefs, they would shift everything. Because here's the reality. Our lives are driven by stories that we tell ourselves. And you might have heard different stories. Like the one I always go to because it's a big one this New Year's is the whole idea of exercise and weight loss and all that. And you hear different people tell these stories. Oh, I have a very slow metabolism. Or there's no way I could possibly lose weight, or I'm big boned, or I'm this, or those are just stories. They're not true. They are not true, but we believe they're true. And as long as we believe they are true, all of a sudden they will hold you back. And if you listen to the previous episodes, one of the best things I do for my clients that I'm really, really good at is what I call mythbusters or breaking your story. Because most people come to me because they're not getting what they want, which is to be a CISO. There's a few people that are CISOs and want to be the best that come to me, but that's probably less than 5%. 95% of the people that come to me is because they're stuck. Because they want to be a chief information security officer. A part of them believes they can. But another part of them is stuck in a story that they're not CISO material. Oh, I've never been a CISO, so no one's going to hire me. If that was true, I love when people come to that one, going, Eric, unless you're currently a CISO, you can't get a job as a CISO. Really? Think about that. Think about how illogical that logic is. If it was true that the only possible way somebody would get a CISO job is if they were already a CISO, there wouldn't be any CISOs. Because think about it. Every CISO at some point in their career, when they had the CISO title, it was the first time. Everybody. Right? Everybody was the first time they got a job or the first time they were a CISO. So this idea that you can't become a CISO unless you are a CISO is just illogical. It doesn't make sense. The world wouldn't exist, right? There would be zero CISOs because nobody ever was a CISO to become a CISO, right? So I sort of laugh, but people are serious. I got to be careful not to laugh at the illogical logic because they're serious. They actually believe the story. They believe it to be true. So what I have to do is very carefully, because if they believe a story to be true and you just tell them it's false, they're going to fight it. So what I have to start doing is raising their awareness. I start shining lights on different angles until they become aware that it's not a true story. Until they become aware that it's fictional. And then once they're aware that their story is just not true, everything changes and everything shifts. So while I'm going to go in to some of the stories, some of the fictional facts that executives believe to be true, that you as a CISO have to overcome. That's really this third episode. I looked at other fact versus fictions of CISOs, but this episode's all about things that your executives believe to be true. You know aren't, but if you don't realize that they think it's true and you help them change their story, you're going to get stuck. You're going to be hard to be a CISO because you're fighting with reality that is not aligned with your reality. If you think the world is flat and I think the world is round, and I assume that you think the way that I think, we're going to have problems. Because I'm going to want to go sailing and you're going to be terrified that we're going to fall off the end of the earth, right? It's not going to work. So one of the big problems in communication between anybody, but I'm focusing on executives and CISOs. One of the biggest problems between executives and CISOs is they believe different things to be true, and neither side realizes it, verifies, or validates that that's the case. So if I'm walking into a meeting and I think X is true, and you think X is false, but neither one of us realizes that the other person doesn't believe the same way that we do, and they never recognize it, that's where this occurs. And that's the number one problem we find with CISOs and executives, is they don't understand the same thing, and they view different things as facts and different things as fiction. So your job as a CISO is to understand and recognize where your executives are treating fictional things as facts and going in and very gently showing them that their current beliefs are not true and teaching them a new story. So the first fictional piece of information that executives believe to be factual is all breaches can be prevented. There are many executives out there that believe that cybersecurity is a technical problem, and with the right budget and right resources, you should be able to fix all vulnerabilities and issues, and you should be able to secure the organization so that breaches should never happen. How do we know that? How do I know that that's a fictional statement that executives believe to be factual? It's easy. It's easy. Look at every major breach. What does every major breach have in common? After the breach occurs, what do? They fire the CISO. Why? Because they believe that breaches shouldn't happen. They believe that the metric for cybersecurity is 100% security. They believe the metric is we never have a breach, and therefore, if a breach happens, the CISO failed to do their job, and they get fired. And we see this over and over again. You can look at any major breach. Every major breach I know of over the last 5 years, in every single situation, the CISO got fired, which tells you their metric and your metric is different. So if you don't fix that, as a CISO, that is the first thing you must do. Because if you don't fix that, then basically, when you become CISO, you have a terminal illness. You're going to be fired. Why? Because a breach is inevitable. Breaches are going to happen. So if your executives believe that breaches should not happen, and when a breach happens, you failed and they're going to fire you, and you know for a fact that breaches are going to happen, if you don't fix that immediately, you're basically have a terminal illness where it might be 6 months, it might be 9 months, it might be a year, but you're going to get fired. You're going to get canned, and you don't want that to happen. So that's the first thing every good CISO does. Now, it might take multiple meetings, it might take multiple occurrences, but you need to sit down and explain to them that cybersecurity is not a technical problem and it cannot be fixed. It's a business problem dealing with risk that must be managed, which means you're never going to be 100% secure. You can't, because 100% security means zero functionality. And zero functionality means you're out of business. So the reality is, as our companies have grown more and more and more, and we've added more functionality, because let's face it, over the last 15 years, the amount of functionality via computers and digital technology have exploded. Look at a website from 1990 and look at a website today, right? The amount of functionality embedded in these websites and applications that run any business. I don't care what business you are a digital electronic business using computers and networks in order to function. And you have a lot of functionality, which means you have many risks. Every time you add functionality, and this is the law of cybersecurity, you as a CISO must make sure that your executives know the law. Just like the law of gravity, the law of cybersecurity is always at play. I always love, because there's some people like, Eric, I don't know if I'm buying in. If I'm buying into this law of cybersecurity. Well, you don't have to buy in. It's a law. It's like you sitting there going, I don't know if I buy into this gravity thing. I'm just not sure I'm into this whole gravity thing. That's okay. But guess what? You step off a 20-story building, and gravity will be introduced to you very quickly. So it doesn't matter whether you buy into it or not, right? It's a law and it's at play. And it's the same thing with cyber. You don't have to buy into it. It's always there. So your executives need to realize that every time they add functionality, they decrease security or increase risk. And your job is to show them that you are doing a good job of managing risk, but there's risks that you're accepting. In order to run a business, you have to accept risk. Now, this is true outside of cyber, right? Any business executive knows this. They know that to run a business, there are financial risks. There are customer risks, right? There's many, many risks out there. What they fail to realize is that the same logic applies to cybersecurity. Because as we've talked about, cyber has been bundled with IT. And IT is a technical problem that with the right resources actually can be solved to a very, very high degree. So they think falsely that cybersecurity is the same way. They think that cybersecurity can be solved to a high degree, and it can't. And this is where communication is key. You need to communicate to your executives the risks. When was the last time you sat down with your executives and showed them what the risks were, which ones you're mitigating and which ones you're not? Because we all know, and this is fact versus fiction, we know factually that there are many, many risks that we can't get rid of because either it's a reality of running the business, we're accepting the risk because the functionality outweighs the benefit, we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough people. Any CISO I sit with absolutely knows that to be true. Here's the problem. When I sit with executives, they don't. I'll go to the same company. I've done this over and over and over again. I've gone to the same company and I've sit down with the CISO. And I'm like, are there risks right now that are unmitigated? Are there risks that could cost the company millions upon millions of dollars? Absolutely, Eric, absolutely. And they'll show them to me. And then I'll sit down with the CEO or COO or CFO, and I'll ask them the same question. And they're like, no, Eric, we're solid with security. All the big risks, all the big issues are mitigated, and we're in great shape. And I'm sitting there going, you two need to talk. You guys need to have a conversation because your views of reality are not the same, right? And that's going to lead to a major, major problem. It's going to lead to two major problems. One, the company's going to have a big breach. And two, you as a CISO is going to get fired, right? Neither one is good. So you need to communicate that. And for some reason, I don't know why, and I think it's because a lot of CISOs come from a technical background. And technical, you don't like talking about the bad things. You don't like bringing them up. You're supposed to fix them. But you need to communicate that. Your executives need to be aware that when I ask you the question and I ask them the question, we get the same answer. Because if we don't, that's a recipe for disaster. And the next sort of fact versus fiction, which is tied into that, is some companies have never had a breach. Some companies might not have detected a breach, but they had a breach, right? Breaches are happening, right? They are happening all the time. It's sort of like going in, and people laugh at me because I do say it somewhat fictitiously, but you sit there and go, oh, I don't get sick. No, you get sick, you just manage it so the frequency and the symptoms are reduced. So the impact on your life is less. But the reality is, as humans, right, humans get sick. It's just a reality, right? Companies have breaches. If you are a company that are functioning, if you are making money, if you have computers and networks and systems, then the reality is you have risks and you have a breach and are going to be breached again in the future. So what we need to do is embrace the breach. We need to go in and stop thinking breach is a dirty word, right? I go in, and it's funny because one company, I won't mention their names, that I work with, they've had a breach. They've had a couple. And it's like I go in and I bring it up. Oh, it's like it gets really uncomfortable in the room. And it's like I'm saying dirty words. And I finally, in one of the meetings, I just sort of put my fist down. I'm like, I said, come on. I said, what is the problem here? It happened. We fixed it. It's going to happen again. Why are we afraid to talk about it? Why are we treating breach as a dirty word? It happens. We embrace the breaches. We own the breaches, and that's the only way we're going to minimize and reduce the next one if we're willing to talk about it and recognize that it happened. It's not a negative. You're no different than any other company. The only difference between you is yours was publicly exposed and theirs wasn't. But other than that, there's no other difference. So why are we ashamed? Why are we afraid? Why are we not willing to talk about this issue? And it was sort of like this awkwardness where I'm like, I'm either going to get fired because I was a contractor, right? They brought me in, or we're going to have a breakthrough moment, right? And it's one of those, it's like, I don't know if any of you race cars, but if you're racing cars on a track, it's inevitable. The car is going to spin at some point. When you are going that fast and there are unknown variables, you don't know the car in front can drop oil, right? One of your tires could get a little bald and be a little off. There could be anything on the track, any sort of debris that flew up from somebody going on the pit. I mean, all sorts of factors that you can't plan. So the car is going to spin. And when it starts spinning, we know the rules. Where do you look? Trained drivers look at where they want to go. They look at where they want to go on the track and they turn into it. Now, question. As soon as my car starts spinning, if I start doing the right thing, I look at where I want to go and I start turning into it. Does it automatically fix? Does the car instantly stop spinning and get on the track? No. There's a delay. There's a delay from when that happens. And then, even if I do the right thing, at the right time, at the right moment, is it 100% guaranteed that I won't hit the wall? No, I could still hit the wall. But if you look at the wall and you focus on the wall, it's a guarantee you're going to hit it. All right, so it was one of those moments where I'm in that meeting and I sort of dropped this bomb on everybody. And I knew the car started spinning and I knew I started turning it, but it's like, okay, there's that delay, right? Am I going to recover or am I going to hit the wall, right? And like I said, you never know. And that's what I love. Driving is such a great analogy in life because you can do the right thing and it doesn't mean you're going to get the right results. But if you do the wrong thing, it's a guarantee you get the wrong results. So it's what are you focused on and where do you put your energy and effort? And then one of the last facts versus fiction that I want to cover is this idea of industry. So we sort of get into this where you have different industries. You have financial, you have healthcare, you have pharmaceutical, you have oil and gas, right? You have all these different industries. And there's some people, oh, every industry is different. Every industry is unique. So cybersecurity is not the same across industries. Wait. Cybersecurity is about understanding, managing, and mitigating risk to your critical assets being disclosed, altered, or denied access. Now you're telling me that definition is different? So if you're in healthcare, you have a different definition? No. So it's level of granularity. Cybersecurity is the same. It is the same at a high level. It's about managing risk to critical data across the three areas. But where it starts getting different is, what is acceptable risk? Right? Acceptable risk at an e-commerce site where you might ship somebody the wrong item is quite different than in a hospital, right, where you might give somebody the wrong medicine. Pretty big impact, right? One, you're a little frustrated because you didn't get what you ordered. The other one, somebody could lose their life. So pretty big differential on that front. So yes, the general concepts of security are the same, but how you apply them and where you put focus shifts and changes. Once again, cybersecurity is about understanding, managing, mitigating risk to your critical assets. What your critical assets are different in different industries, but here's the big one. It's managing risk to your critical assets of being disclosed, altered, or denied access. That shifts radically. When you're looking at confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the prioritization shifts based on the industry. So if you're in one industry, you might put a lot more attention on confidentiality. Another one might be integrity, and another one might be availability. So where you put the focus, energy, and effort is going to shift dramatically depending on the industry you're in. So this is sort of fact versus fiction. Cybersecurity at a general level is the same. That is true. But how you apply it, how you implement it, and what your focus and prioritization is quite different. This is why people that are good in IT, information technology security, struggle when it comes to OT, operational technology, oil and gas, infrastructure, chemical processing, and things like that. Because in IT, your primary methods of security are patching, are updating, are reducing services, are getting rid of things you don't need. In OT, your primary method of security is air gap and physical isolation. Because if you have a server in IT that's accessible from the internet, that thing better be patched. That better be up to date. Because an unpatched system is an accident waiting to happen. So if you have a system that hasn't been patched for 2 or 3 months, that's detrimental in IT. I mean, that's almost a guarantee, because nowadays attackers are reverse engineering patches, and on average, we're seeing unpatched systems being broken into within 30 days or less. So in IT world, patch, 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 patch. OT, on the other hand, one of the worst possible things you can do to an OT system is patch it. Because remember, these systems that are controlling the flow of chemicals or the generation of electricity or the flow of water are built for availability and simplicity. They're not built for robustness. They're not built to be connected to the internet. Many of these, if you just run basic vulnerability scans against them, they're going to crash and go down hard, which means OT systems, you don't patch typically for years, and you have to go through a very long process of checking, verifying, and validating. And this is why OT systems can't be on IT networks or connected to IT systems. And this is the problem why you've seen so many issues, Colonial Pipeline and all these others. It's because we forgot fact versus fiction. We forgot that OT systems can't be patched and OT systems can't be accessible from the internet. You put an OT system accessible from the internet, and it is a guarantee it's going to get compromised, because we know they're vulnerable. We know they're missing patches. That is by design. And that's the reason why the primary security for OT is air gap and the primary security for IT is patching. So we need to make sure we understand and recognize those differences. So if you've liked this series on fact versus fiction, I have some bad news for you. We're at the end. If you didn't like it, I have good news for you. We're at the end. But the reality is, this whole idea of fact versus fiction, where you question reality, question your beliefs, not only is a very valuable skill for being a CISO, because I'll tell you, there's many factual things that people believe when it comes to cybersecurity that are not true, that are fiction. So the more that you're aware, the more powerful a CISO you'll be. But if you want to take your life to the next level, recognize that a lot of your beliefs and a lot of your stories and a lot of the things that you tell yourself about other people and the world that you believe to be true might not be true. And as soon as you start fixing, changing, and adjusting those things, everything, and I mean everything in your world, could start to change very, very quickly. Once again, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Life of a CISO, and we'll see you next week.